whose iPad. I don't know who iPad is, but welcome iPad to our meeting. Okay. All right, I'm going to push the recording.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, welcome everyone. It is Wednesday, May 11th at 6:30. This is a regularly scheduled select board meeting. I'm Roger Arnold. I'm joined by board members Mary Layton, Vice Chair Claudette Brochu, Rob Gear, and Marcia Calloway. We also have Rod Francis, Town Manager, with us as well. CATV just told me we are live. Thank you, CATV. This is a remote-only meeting, which means that there isn't a physical, in accordance to the temporary provisions to the open meeting law, which means that there isn't a public location to be contemporaneously. All votes that are not unanimous may be roll called. We welcome public comments for all items that are on the agenda. Board member discussion will be prioritized. Please consider making your public comments as a comment and stating your name and locatable address and keeping your comment to 3 minutes to the extent possible. And then also, of course, please direct these comments to me and I'll direct folks accordingly. Okay. All right, so the first item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Go ahead, Mary. Thank you.
I move to approve the agenda.
Thank you. Is there a second? Okay, I think I saw Claudette. Made by Mary, seconded by Claudette. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. The next item on the agenda is public comments for items that are not on the agenda. And I see Lily Trashman's hand. So I will bring you over. Sorry about that. Here we go. Go ahead, welcome.
Hi, Lily Tryman, 236 Main Street. I wanted to make some comments on the Child Care Committee findings. And I'm doing this as myself and not as a member of the school board or the women's club or anything else. So at the school board meeting last week, we got to listen in on a presentation from the Child Care Committee. And I wanted to express that I think it was a mistake to focus on infant and preschool childcare. I would urge you to reconvene a committee to look at childcare of school-aged kids from 5 to 12, because that's 10% of the Norwich population that has no care after school, right? Very few parents get out of their jobs at 3 p.m. Very few parents are available to just deal with their kids between 3 and 5 or 6 p.m. And it seems to me that this is the sort of thing that a childcare committee could effect in Norwich. The preschool and infant care situation is something that's been going on for years and is a national or state issue. There's really no solution to it, and I've put 3 kids through preschool. It's always a struggle and it's always expensive. But this is the first town I've ever lived in where elementary aged aftercare is not available and on a drop-in basis, which makes it really hard for parents who need to pick their kids up at 3 p.m. The other thing I think the Child Care Committee missed out on was the 10 weeks of summer, because once your kids are in school, they have 10 weeks where you have to pay for them to go elsewhere. And I feel like that's sort of the low-hanging fruit of childcare in Norwich. If you want to fix something, this is a very easy place to start because summer camp tends to pay for itself. I take issue with the camps as they are here and that they've gone up a lot in price. They were $50 a week when I started here 8 years ago. They're now, I think, $160. And they offer half-day care. So the Hartford rec camps offer 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. care for $175 a week. And there's no incentive to put your kids in for 4 hours a day. Mm-hmm. So I would really urge the select board to convene a new child care committee and look at the issue of kids ages 5 to 12, elementary age. See what the town of Norwich can do for this population. See if they can run an inclusive aftercare program. I know there have been programs, but they've had long wait lists. They're hard to get into, and they don't serve all the parents. So this is really something I feel like the select board needs to think about addressing if they're concerned with childcare in Norwich. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much for your comment. It's really appreciated. Okay. Any other public comments? Any select board comments? Go ahead, Mary. I thought you might have one.
Yeah, it's a select board comment. We had a addition to our packet, which is the results of town attorney responding to questions from Marcia Calloway about the structure of our planning department and our arrangements for planning and zoning. Mm-hmm. And I think that it might be good for us to review as a board the process by which inquiries are made to our town attorney. That I think, I imagine it probably took some time to answer these questions, and I am not sure that they actually are questions that we all agreed are pertinent. So I think I would think that it would be good to review that process. I think that if we need to consult our town attorney, it should be something that we all agree on, is something that we actually vote to find out about, because our legal bills are already so high. So, yeah, a comment.
Thanks so much, Mary. I really appreciate that. Okay. Any other public or select board comments before we move on to the consent agenda? All right, so let's move on then with thanks. I see something in the chat. Sorry. Oh, that was just CATV. Okay. All right. So the next item on the agenda, I believe, is the consent agenda. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. Why don't we begin with the motion, if that's okay?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Okay. Is there a second? Okay. Seconded by Claudette, I believe. Okay. Made by Mary, seconded by Claudette. And any discussion? Go ahead, Claudette. Do you have a discussion?
Just a friendly amendment that the minutes include the proposed changes submitted by Cheryl Lindbergh.
Okay, so your discussion, you would like those changes to be made, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
I agree to the friendly amendment.
Okay, that's great. All right. Any further discussion? Otherwise, go ahead, Marcia.
I had sent a message to Miranda about 2 errors in the draft minutes. And for the record, I'm just putting that here. I'm not sure if it needs a vote or it doesn't. Paragraph 1, third line, there's a typo. Splitting the toe topics should be splitting the 2 topics. Paragraph 8, the motion was not unanimous. I voted no, pending response from council to my memo about the Norwich planning zoning structure.
Okay. Miranda is nodding, so I believe that we are noting that correction. Okay, and so I think we're good. So it sounds, and so normally so I think this is fine. We're having the discussion. So I think normally we would take the minutes out and approve them separately. And so I appreciate Claudette's friendly amendment, right, to try to get it procedurally correct. But I think it's fine that our discussion noted that we wanted these meeting corrections. Okay. Anything else? Anything to discuss? Any questions? Or otherwise, I can call the question. Lovely. Obviously, we'll talk about Chapel Hill later, right? Okay. So, all in favor of approving the consent agenda, please raise your hand. Okay. Thank you. Unanimous. All right. And so we've moved so quickly that I'm now. Okay. Here we go. Appointment of the zoning administrator. Okay, so I think as has been clearly established through a couple of different mechanisms, right? That the planning commission makes the recommendation to the board, and the board makes the appointment, and so that's what we are looking here to do. Okay, why don't we begin with a motion?
All right. I move to appoint Stephen Bauer to the position of zoning administrator effective May 12th.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, made by Mary, seconded by Rob. And in the discussion, why don't we get introduced to our temporary zoning administrator, Stephen Bauer. Do you want to just say hello to us and sort of what you're able to do for us and what you're doing for other towns a little bit, right? Because you're acting as a zoning administrator for a couple of different communities right now, as we have a dearth of zoning administrators in the region, right? So if you could maybe just talk about that, that would be maybe cool, and then we'll have some discussion about the motion.
Absolutely. Thanks, Roger, and hello to everyone. As Roger mentioned, my name is Stephen Bauer. I am a senior planner at Two Rivers Adequacy Regional Commission. That's a mouthful, but that's the full name. So right now, I'm actually sitting in Woodstock because we have a Village Development Review Board meeting tonight, and so right now I'm serving as the interim, both in Woodstock and Norwich, as well as Randolph. So glad to have Norwich on board, and look forward to working with you all and keeping permits moving, but also bring hopefully some new perspectives and things that I can share with you, and we can bounce off each other.
Great. Thanks. And then our contract with Two Rivers for your work and for your appointment is obviously through June. So there's that as well. Okay. Any further discussion from board members? Go ahead, Claudette.
Yeah, just looking for some clarification. Is this an interim or acting zoning administrator? The motion doesn't support that.
Yeah, that's a good question. Rod has his hand, so let's turn to Rod.
So there's some options, I guess, for the select board to contemplate. So as you know, right now I'm the zoning administrator, and typically the structure for a town is to have a zoning administrator and an acting zoning administrator, such that if the zoning administrator is absent, somebody else can act in their stead. There's some questions about the length of service that Stephen can offer us. The contract runs through the end of June. And there's questions about the most suitable arrangement. My recommendation would be that Stephen be appointed the zoning administrator and that I be appointed the acting zoning administrator, such that when and if, for example, if at the end of June, Stephen is assigned to other duties and can no longer be the zoning administrator for Norwich, then there's continuity by me being the acting zoning administrator until we recruit a permanent part-time zoning administrator. And so I'm happy to take questions if that's not clear enough, but the arrangement, for instance, when I was the zoning administrator, was that Herb was also appointed the acting zoning administrator, so that if I was out and the zoning administrator decision needed to be made, Herb was able to do that. Go ahead. Sorry, I shouldn't. Go ahead, Mary.
I think that sounds prudent in terms of coverage. I'm wondering, since we are in a position of trying to recruit a permanent zoning administrator, and apparently they're scarce, there's also maybe the issue of continuity. Like, how is continuity maintained if we have to, move through several people? Is it apparent? Is it administratively kind of clear what happens if this is passed from one person to the other? I assume it's just mostly administrative, but is there, are there interpretive elements that would change depending on who you would have?
Right.
Let me try and answer that. I think that's a good question, Mary. What I'd say is that the vast majority of the work of the zoning administrator is discrete. And so, whenever one zoning administrator leaves and the next person takes on the role, there may be some things left out there hanging. Somebody's called the day before or the week before and hasn't had a definitive answer, or they're waiting on answers for a permit application. But for the most part, given the kind of tracking that we can do in the office and the follow-up that we can do, I don't think that there's a continuity problem in that sense. the continuity issue more narrowly is you just need to have somebody that can act as a zoning administrator on at any time. It's not something that you can have a vacancy for, right? So yeah, but I think in terms of the filing system and the record keeping and all that kind of stuff, the continuity around those things, I'm not that concerned about. Yeah.
Okay.
And Pam, and obviously Pam Mulling as the assistant is and has been for some time, right?
Right. So the reason I'm not concerned is the long-standing role that Pam has played in the office and her knowledge of what's going on, and she is the glue that's going to keep the two zoning administrators together.
Thank you.
Okay, and so just to add some clarity to what Claudette was saying, we're making an appointment for a zoning administrator, but the contract, managed by the town, sort of implies a term, a length, and that we would have to renew any contract if Stephen were to stay with us, and or what have you. Okay, any further questions? Go ahead, Marcia.
Hey, Stephen, Marcia Calloway. So this is the first time we've done this, and hiring someone, I'm always used to seeing a CV or a resume or something. That hasn't been provided. So I'd like to know what training you've had and how much experience you've had on the job doing this.
Yeah, that's great. Oh, sorry, Roger.
No, go ahead.
Stephen, I'd like to hear from Stephen.
Yeah, actually, I'd like to speak first, if you wouldn't mind. So I think there's some important role distinctions to be applied here.
Go ahead, Rod. Quickly clarify, and then I'm going to go look up Stephen's bio from the website, so we have a little bit of that context to Marcia's point. Okay.
So let me make this as clear as I possibly can. In my capacity as a town manager, I'm enabled under statute and under my contract to retain the services of either consultants or vendors or contractors, either for short-term or long-term commitments. And in this instance, we've already signed an agreement with the Two Rivers Regional Planning Commission. And so the question of Stephen's bio and background, which I'm sure he's happy to outline to you, it's actually not germane in the sense that the decision to offer Stephen's name as a zoning administrator and have the select board appoint him as a zoning administrator is also bound by the contract that you've already signed with Two Rivers Regional Planning Commission to provide those services. So it's not a moment where it's appropriate to review Stephen's experience or skill set and make a decision as to whether you're going to proceed with the appointment or not in that regard. I just wanted to make that clear.
Thank you. Sure. Would you make it clear why we're having to do the appointment then, if you've already done it?
Statute requires us to do it, as your request for the legal advice has made clear. So, but I do appreciate, that we're meeting, someone who's going to do work for us, and that we should have a discussion of his bio. So let's move on. So Stephen can talk more specifically. Is it Steve or Stephen? Sorry,
That'd
sir.
Be great.
And so he could talk to us a little bit of his experience, and I'm dropping his bio in the chat for folks who prefer to read. Go ahead. Tell us a little bit about some of your experience in zoning and land use law.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. So a lot of I came here originally to go to, I went to law school, and graduated, about a year ago. And most of my education was in natural resources and land use law. So I have background working with A&R, both in Vermont as well as Montana, as well as legislative counsel, working specifically on state level land use, but then was hired from my training in land use, municipal capacity to work with towns throughout the region at Two Rivers to actually help write and actually put together bylaw amendments. So I help with all the towns with zoning and kind of just being a general resource, as well as actually advocating for changes that planning commissions want to make. So that's a kind of, as quick as I can be, a little bit of my background. So it's a lot of training and then a lot of application of the last 7-8 months, as well as serving in my capacity recently as an actual zoning administrator.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Great.
Thanks, Mark.
Any further questions, or so can I call the question? Okay, go ahead, Marcia.
Just clarification. This is to June of 22. When is this ending, this contract?
The contract that we executed at our last meeting, I believe is through June. But Rod, do you recall the specific date?
June 24th.
Okay.
June 24th. Cool. All right. So we have about 5 more minutes for this agenda item. Otherwise, I'll happily call the question if that's okay. All right. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Stephen.
Isn't there a follow-up with the motion to support Rod as the acting?
Yes.
Okay. Shall I do that?
Would you like to make that motion? Please, Mary. Thank you.
Yes, please. I move to appoint Rod Francis to the position of acting zoning administrator effective May 12th, 2022.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, made by Mary, seconded by Rob. Any discussion? Okay, I'll call the all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, great, thank you. Thanks for all of the clarity information that we had for this agenda item. All right, so let's move on to the bridge closure on Chapel Hill Road. And Chris Kaufman, our DPW director, just joined us, which is great. So we've had some correspondence, and then we had the benefit of Chris's memo in the packet. So I'm going to actually just turn, Rod, if it's okay, to Chris. And can you just sort of very quickly highlight to us a little bit about what informed your recommendation to ultimately close this bridge?
Yes. So can everybody hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So when I first arrived here, I realized that we had initially had planned to do some work out on that particular bridge, but that project through a grant proposal. And then that was at the last minute change to focus on Tiger Town and Route 132 project that's ongoing this year. So when the grant proposal came up again this year, I looked a little closer at what Stantec had done as far as a bridge assessment. I contacted Stantec and asked them a little bit more in particular about that bridge. They said that it was basically a cursory review. There were no hydraulic studies on that, and they didn't involve VTrans. The recommendation was based on, I believe, the prior director's recommendation. So it was a fairly, I would say, simplistic overview. Once I had a chance to take a look at the bridge a little closer, I realized the significant damage that the bridge had undergone and continued to have problems. I really felt as though that the proposed recommendation, the cursory recommendation, was woefully inadequate, and Stantec did basically confirm that in my conversation with them. So at that point in time, I reached out to 3 different folks at the state of Vermont. One person was Scott Jensen, who's the rivers engineer for the DEC. The second person is Chris Bump, who handles all the grant programs for the AOT. And I also reached out to Sven Scribner, who works in their bridge maintenance program, and he's an AOT manager, longtime bridge person. They all 3 separately came out to the site. They looked at the bridge. All of them, from their different perspectives, came to the same conclusion that, as I addressed in here in my in my overview, that the bridge was seriously in need of major repair, and that the repair would be a significant cost, and that it in no way would match up to what was in the Stantec proposal. The numbers that I put in here in regards to the major deficiencies basically came from VTrans, based on their experience, their years of experience at this. So I felt pretty confident that my assessment matched up closely with 3 separate individuals with the state of Vermont, as well as Stantec's, conclusion that they didn't really. This was mainly just a sort of an inventory of existing structure in the town, mainly to capture it in a document, not necessarily to do a full assessment. And I'm happy to touch on a little bit more in detail about what the major deficiencies are again, but I would imagine you all read the memo. So, but that's what got us up to this point. So.
Great. And then because you're recommending ultimately a closure for this, can you talk about what other staff you consulted in terms of emergency services and a little bit about, what a closure would do for this area?
Well, my recommendation was based on a twofold consideration, really. One was a safety issue, frankly, and second was a liability issue. Significantly, we have a requirement under the statutes to address any road or bridge deficiencies immediately. That's on us, especially if it's town-owned bridge, which is considered a short bridge, town-owned infrastructure, and that responsibility lies on our shoulders. As well as the fact that right now the bridge railing is basically broken off, and as the state confirmed that railing is not crash test worthy. So we are in a position, if somebody went off the edge of that bridge and wasn't paying attention, the town would be significantly in a real bad situation from a liability standpoint, and not just the fact that, and frankly, somebody's life could be at risk here, and I think that's a big concern. Not to mention, I really don't want our trucks to be on a bridge that is deficient in that manner, especially during the wintertime with 2 significant hard turns. So I reached out to both the fire department and the police department to get their feedback to make sure that what I was recommending was immediate closure, because I felt like the risk, we're sort of playing Russian roulette here, waiting. We really should, depending on the pathway we take, we should take the conservative approach, shut it down until we can make a decision on how we want to dispose of the bridge or address it. But I reached out to both the fire department and police department, and I told them that basically it was about an 800 and I think I said 60 feet extra distance up Beaver Meadow, and they both concurred that it wasn't an impact to their response or their ability to access any residences along there, as long as they could get up to the end of Chapel, to the last home on Chapel Hill.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Chris. That was really helpful summary. Does anyone have any questions? Go ahead, Claudette.
Do you know how many, I read, I think I can't remember the minutes that it would impact somebody's commute, but do you know how many families would be impacted?
I don't think anybody would be impacted, frankly. I don't know people's particular routes they take, but if you were to assume that bridge were closed and say the house that's closest to it would have to, instead of going down and heading up to close to Ruella and doing this crazy hard turn, that's frankly difficult as it is, and the distance, you can't see much on that turn. I think you're probably adding a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes. I don't know. It's hard to say. Maybe less, 3 minutes. So okay. I don't think it's significant problem. So.
Great. Marcia, go ahead.
It seems to me that there's kind of 2 questions here, not one. The first question is the closure, and I have to agree, you take the conservative approach and close it. But the second question is for how long and what we do next. So I just was trying to figure out Claudette's question, and I looked at the grand list, and it looked like there were 13 houses, or on the grand list, 13 properties down Chapel Hill between Beaver Meadow and the last house. And I don't know where people go on a daily basis. I don't know how it's going to impact them, but I do know that I would be very upset if I lived in an area and the select board made a decision affecting me and I didn't have notice. So I'd sort of advocate for closing the bridge for safety immediately, and then giving everybody notice and hearing from people so that they have an opportunity to be heard and we can make an appropriate decision after that.
Okay. Rod, did you have a follow-up a little bit on this? Obviously, we have two messages in correspondence of people on this road sharing, offering some feedback. Do you have a public engagement process in a public engagement process? What will we do? What will you and Chris do, I guess, after we make this decision one way or another?
I want to emphasize that both Chris and I are really concerned about the physical standard of the bridge, and we're concerned that every day it remains open, there's a risk of a serious accident, which we don't want to encounter. And if it wasn't, if it wasn't of such a dramatic nature, I'm sure we would reach out to the neighborhood affected and discuss what our findings were, and then as a precursor to this meeting, and would have informed the community of the information that we'd gathered. But I think that given the state of the bridge, we're pressing to move more quickly in this instance. I think that if the board is able to reach the conclusion that you agree that the bridge should be shut, it will take us a little while to amass the materials to close the bridge off and to do that work. So it won't be Friday morning that we shut the bridge. If the decision is made tonight to shut the bridge, we will, using the E91 address system and other ways of contacting people, contact the people along Chapel Hill and that section of Mitchell Brook that could be affected by the closure and notify them immediately. I think I've frozen here. So that would be that short-term outreach process. And then we would ask that we could convene probably at the bridge site itself at a predetermined time, and then encourage people in the neighborhood to meet us there and discuss, the issues. But I think that unfortunately, it's one of those moments where building in some kind of extensive back and forth between the neighborhood and the select board is, I'm advising you not to do that, not to extend that decision-making process.
Sure. Claudette, go ahead.
Just one question. I imagine you're going to be using Jersey barriers to block the bridge access, or will there be some other plan, and how quickly can it be done if we agree to close the bridge?
Well, what I would do is probably use Jersey barriers and signage. I'd also confer with VTrans as to what their recommendations would be in this particular case. And then between the time that we close the bridge on both sides, this would be between this time, we would have to look at how we would be addressing plowing in the wintertime if a decision can't be made prior to that, because we're talking about significant costs here, both for repair and replacement, and frankly, the design effort that would have to go in even for a repair. You'd have to tear down the complete bridge to actually put the concrete seats in correctly, and you'd have to probably put them on piling. So the repair is significant. But because of that, we would have to come up with some way to, I'd have to discuss with my foreman how we would address the plowing for the winter.
Do you have a quick follow-up, Claudette?
Yeah, it was just how quickly can the Jersey barriers be put in place?
Pretty quickly. Yeah. I would say we could probably, if you make the decision today, I would try to have something up by Friday. At least, it may not be perfect, but we would get something up pretty soon. And then we would work next week to try to finalize and confer with any other additional signage or barriers as necessary.
Okay, so Marcia and then Mary, and then we need to sort of pay attention to our motion because it has more than just a closure in it. So go ahead, Marcia.
Yeah, so in case anybody else other than Rod misunderstood me, I am all for closing something that is broken. We can't have people go into a ditch. So I don't care if it's closed tonight. What I care about is long term, and that we have time to talk to people and get their input. Because if we're talking about making this a permanent, blunted dead end, that might have an effect on people. Something we can't help today, and because we can't fix it today, but it might be something we need to think about and give people the courtesy of having their say so that we understand what other people are experiencing. We have time for that.
Yeah, go ahead, Mary.
Just a question. The Jersey barriers, of course, are very effective to stop vehicles from going across, but just in terms of anybody who would be a pedestrian that might want to hop over those, is signage sort of enough of a warning that if someone pushes it and crosses that bridge, that the town wouldn't be liable? I don't know.
Well, I think we should. I think we should confer with an attorney on that issue. But I believe as long as we effectively say the road's closed, and we have the authority to do so, and both pedestrian and vehicular traffic, that we've covered our bases. And if somebody chooses to go around and use it, then they're taking their own risk.
They take it at their own risk. Okay, thank you. That makes sense.
Okay, I do want to, it's 7:07. We have 3 minutes before we have to move on. I see Rod and then I see Claudette, but our motion sheet has an
I was going to make the motion.
Okay, go ahead. Thank you, Claudette.
So I move to close the Chapel Hill South Road Bridge immediately due to its unsafe condition and to authorize the construction of a turnaround.
Okay, thank you.
Or turnarounds. Wouldn't that be plural, one on each side?
Probably not. We would close the entire section up to the main road up on Mitchell Brook. So we wouldn't even have a road down. So it would be just one side.
To construct a turnaround.
Okay.
I'll second it.
Okay, made by Claudette, seconded by Mary. We have 2 minutes. I would, I would just like to say, quickly, our previous capital plan under the previous town manager had, $36K in this fiscal year being expended for an abutment, right? Obviously, the facts on the ground are a lot different than that sort of capital plan recommendation. I will say there are other bridges, including Elm Street, right? The Elm Street Bridge that, so I agree that the important priority is this closure, but I'm very comfortable engaging in a dialogue that's based on the fact that it will be a future time or future board that looks at this bridge as a pedestrian bridge, but it is not conceivable that it would be a priority at this moment. So I'm all for hearing from the community, but I do think that if we look at our existing projects, it would be hard to imagine that repairing or reopening this would be a priority in the immediate future. And I think that is the honest. But go ahead, Marcia. You get the final. You'll get the final word, and then we'll move on because we have to call the question. This motion sounds sort of final. The construction of a turnaround sounds like that's it, end of discussion. And what you just said sounds like that's what it is, and that people would have to bring a petition or request to open or repair the bridge in the future. So Yeah.
Just wondering.
Go ahead, Claudette.
And I would argue, Marcia, that when we look at capital budgeting and projects, that if there is going to be discussion about adding Chapel Hill Bridge, that it be taken up at that time.
Right.
But it's nothing that is going to be immediate,
right.
Probably within a 1 or 2 or probably even 3-year period. When you look at all the engineering studies and the grants and the applications and the blah, blah, blahs and the blah, blah, blahs, and the putting money aside, we're not talking about anything that's going to be done this year or even next year.
Which is why it needs to be sort of that blunt turnaround, regardless of Claudette speaking to a process. I'm making my own assessment based on 4 years on the board. But I think Claudette is right.
If you're looking at priorities for bridges, Chapel Hill is probably one that has how many cars per day versus Elm Street Bridge.
But we'll get there.
But yeah, so it's just nothing that's going to happen in the next couple of years for sure.
Okay, I would like to call the question because I think we've really done this. I would like to move on, Marcia. Okay.
No, can I just ask one quick thing? Was this harmed in the hurricane, and did we have money that's supposed to be spent on this?
No.
Okay.
All right, let's move on. Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand.
Can the public participate on this?
Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand, Linda Cook. Go ahead. We're over our time for this agenda, but if you can make a quick comment.
Well, there's several things. Number one, I thought there were dollars that were left over from the 17 storm that were put aside to fix this bridge. Wondering what happened to those dollars, number one. Number two, I'm really concerned of safety out there because of the traffic, speed, and possibly younger age people, that I hope there's a pretty aggressive sign package that's going to have this well identified as a closed area. And are you thinking, or haven't even talked about, the future of a discontinuance of the road or throwing up the road, or is that we're just going to wait and see when you decide to open it?
Mm-hmm.
Thanks so much for highlighting that was what we were talking about. So I appreciate you like reiterating those concerns. We hear them. We appreciate it. Thank you, Linda.
So no answer on the lighting or anything, or we'll hear from that when you do it?
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks so much. Okay, so I'm going to call the question then. Sorry, I didn't see your hand, Linda. All in favor?
Okay.
Please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. All right, so thank you, Chris. Thank you, Rod. The next is the town manager report. We allocated 5 minutes. I think Rod alerted me to the fact that he wanted to use this time to bring up something that is not in the written report. So I'm going to give it 10 minutes, if that's okay. Rod, go ahead. Do you want to start?
Sure.
Yeah.
Let me be as quick as I possibly can. You see the manager's report in the packet. Let me just add a couple of comments to each one of them, and I'll come back to the key thing I want to discuss tonight. So Chris Fielding and I continue to work through the appropriate pricing structure for the transfer station. We've taken on board comments, very useful comments from the Solid Waste Committee and transfer station staff. Just to reinforce what we already realized, it seems historically that the town, through taxes, subsidizes the operation of the transfer station about 30% a year in terms of the transfer station's total cost to the town. The challenge here is that, as you probably know from reading the news, that the recycling market has collapsed since China has withdrawn from, as a buyer, from taking recycling from the United States. This means that we pay more to get the recycling removed. And we are attempting to introduce a new set of schedule of fees that will probably in this instance maintain that 30% gap, but it's a topic of conversation for the coming budget year as to whether the town is going to consciously do that and what the consequences of that decision are. Obviously, most of the additional costs from the new Casella agreement are associated with diesel nudging $6 a gallon, and the staff to drive the trucks also having increased significantly. So it's a straight pass through on their part. There is no alternative vendor available to us to do this. So it's mostly what we're focusing on is ensuring that the pricing structure that we implement does not leave the town more exposed to subsidizing the operation of the transfer station. Regrettably, it doesn't include collecting enough revenue to do needed capital and safety improvements at the site, which will also be a discussion in the capital plan discussion as part of the budget process. We continue to work with Town Council on the proposed reciprocal license agreement with SAU 70 with regard to the Norwich Nature Area, otherwise known as the Mill Fry Nature Area, which is spelt 2 different ways. And so there are details that are important there for us. I want to flag that as a possible item of discussion with the board in a subsequent meeting, because the implications are potentially significant. And so I'll let you know when we're closer to a final agreement. Everything else is pretty straightforward. Let me turn to the major reason that I wanted to talk to you extemporaneously tonight. So as you see there, we are welcoming Keith Waterman to the Building and Grounds Technician position. We are very lucky to have Keith. He's got a lot of experience as a custodian and a groundskeeper and working in nurseries in the region. And he also has a CDL, so he's actually a very useful person to have on the team, and we are very glad to have him. What we are realizing now is that the buildings and grounds equipment that Keith is required to operate is potentially, potentially problematic in terms of him being able to achieve the role that he's assigned, which is to mow the grass at Huntley Meadows sometimes twice a week, which is a large area, on the mower that's provided, which is, I think, termed a sulky mower. So it doesn't come with the seat. The operator stands at the back of the mower with 2 foot plates that are separately attached to the frame of the mower. And there's a series of body motions that you use to effectively control and direct the mower. And given the amount of grass to cut and the conditions under which he's got to operate it, it's not an appropriate piece of equipment for the task at hand. So the more appropriate piece of equipment would be referred to as a 0-turn mower, which comes with an actual seat, so the operator can sit and control the device with effectively 2 joysticks, and they can have water and hydration on hand so that they don't expire in the heat, and that they are able to focus on their job because they can concentrate on what they're doing rather than trying to stay alive standing on the back of a lawnmower. It's an urgent consideration for us because we think the most appropriate way to treat a member of the workforce in this key position and to maintain the standards that people expect for the fields is to combine the right skills with the right equipment. Currently, we don't have the right equipment. Now, we also have Article 36 and the energy group, and a question to be answered as to whether there's a viable alternative to a gasoline-powered lawnmower. I've taken advice already from a local business person that operates an all-electric landscaping business. I've taken lots of advice from people online. Chris has reached out to local vendors. There's been a lot of discussion of the various forms of alternative forms of equipment. I've reached out to Jeff Martin, our regional energy coordinator, looking for feedback on this question. Roughly speaking, a all-electric commercial quality mower that would suit this task has got serious design limitations and is 3 times the price of a gasoline-powered one. And the question of availability is there. I also need to point out that the question of availability for a regular gas-powered lawnmower is also a serious consideration. There is effectively waiting lists being collected by local dealers for any form of commercial mowing equipment right now. No one can guarantee the supply of anything here. So we're struggling with the same things that everyone else is struggling with, including the supply chain problems. We need to act quickly. And so, because we need to get this work done and we need to get it done safely and properly. And right now, the setting is not safe and it's not the most effective way to do it. So I'm flagging this as an issue. We will continue our outreach and consultation with Article 36 and Jeff Martin. We'll try and make an informed decision, but I'm suggesting and indicating to you that hopefully within the next 2 weeks, we'll have something like a piece of equipment for you to approve the purchase of if it's over the $5,000, which I expect it will be.
Okay.
Questions on that?
Okay, Claudia, I saw your hand.
You good?
She's working on it.
Okay.
Sorry. We have had discussions about bridging, because if the technology is not available in an electric piece of equipment, going for a pre-owned instead of new.
Yeah, I thought about that, and I've been spending my nights looking online. I haven't gone as bad as eBay and Craigslist yet, but I've certainly been looking at dealers. There's basically no used inventory. It's a little bit like the used car situation. There's just nothing out there at all because there's no new ones. No one's trading in their old one. So
even on the state level, even state surplus, have we looked there?
I haven't looked at state surplus yet. That would be a good place to look. But I've got my reservations. One strategy is to buy a cheaper gasoline zero-turn mower that's not going to have the life expectancy of a more expensive commercial grade one, and basically recognize that if we get 2 or 3 years out of it, then we get to make another decision for an electric one. That's probably easier to source and possibly not a bad solution, but it's still money. Is all and I'm happy to do that, and we may end up having to do that. But
so we're at time, and so I just want to say for the purposes of time, and because I know folks might have questions about your report in general, is I want to get away from the mower and the thing for a second to say that, there's 2 things. We need to make sure that these fields are mowed properly and the fields get striped, right? Because that is a very important thing for summer and for our community. And alternatively, our other set of values is that the community does not want to see any more fossil fuel purchases being made, right? So I think I would like to hear very quickly, Rod, what is the short-term solution? Do you plan on trying to borrow or rent a piece of equipment? Are you looking to outside vendors at this time? Just tell us, just before we can move on from this question, what are the short-term measures? Because they don't want fossil fuel infrastructure and we need this stuff mowed.
Really quickly. So I've reached out in this process. I've also reached out to local vendors who, one at least of whom operates all electric equipment. He's booked and he's busy. All the other conventional equipment vendors are now booked for the summer and busy. So it's not like we can find a alternative source of, go out to an outside vendor to get this work done. We could, my hope and expectation is that by next summer, we would go out to bid for having an all-electric service do the areas that we have that are suitable for an electric mower. So in other words, basically smaller. So that the time that the battery charge matched to the task is a better fit. It's just at this point, the technology apparently is not there for doing something as large and as long-term as Huntley Meadows. So look at the other places that we mow, which is considerable. Foley Park the area near the interstate on-ramp, on-off-ramp, around town hall, those places that are all amenable because they're smaller sites to being done by a contractor with electric equipment. So we would commit to reducing our fossil fuel use by having those places done with electric equipment, and then have as efficient as possible gasoline machine to deal with Huntley Meadow. That's one solution. And then if we don't overinvest in a new machine at the moment and a time when electric equipment is viable for Huntley Meadow, switch it out for something electric. But right now, I understand that we're not there yet.
Okay. So if it's okay, I want to move on from the lawnmower. If that's okay with board. Yeah. Sorry, obviously you've contextualized it as a bigger issue. Sorry, I don't mean to be reductive. All right. Go ahead. Any questions? Coletta, I see your hand, then Marcia.
Yeah, I guess one of my obvious one. This is another lawnmower question, but is the current situation safe for the operator at this time? Because if it's not, then we need to do something.
I think that the sustained use, so the expectation that this person can operate this piece of equipment for 7.5 to 8 hours a day is inappropriate. So I think we need to make a decision very quickly.
Okay. Oof. Well, all right. Well, get our people. Go ahead, Marcia.
2 questions. How many employees do we have now in DPW? And how many outstanding FOIA requests are pending with the town?
The number of staff at DPW, Kristen can correct me here, I believe we are at Chris and 3. Chris and 4, including Ben. So that's the custodian for Tracy Hall, Keith, Buildings and Grounds, John, and Scott. So we have three positions open.
Yes.
That we're continuing to recruit for. And in terms of the number of public records requests that are open, there is one, and it's partial. So Mr. Katuki's had a kind of an omnibus request in. 2 of the 3 items have been satisfied. We've collated the information, and he'll receive the rest of the information tomorrow. It's a question of the transmittal given the size and number of the files.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, great. All right. Can we move on? Is that okay?
Yep.
All right. Thanks so much, Rod. Let us go to the RFP for the audit and RFQ for master financial policy procedures and internal controls. I'm gonna turn first to Rod. Rod, very quickly, can you summarize why there are 2 proposals and then how they relate and don't relate to each other? You're on mute.
Sorry, I wish it would recognize my voice. So let me start. The first one in your packet is for auditing services. This is a standard RFP that we issue for a standard item of work, which is a audit of the town's financial statements, as was done by Bonnie Batchelder and Associates for the last 3 years. So that's standard. It identifies a related request for qualification, and that is to obtain consultant advice to review the existing financial policy documents and to review the suggested changes to those financial policies gathered by town staff in the select board. So the process that we envisage here is that a professional accountant with years of experience in municipal finance and accounting will support the work of Fielding and myself to review the financial policies that we have and suggest areas that need improvement. And that process will also involve an engagement with the board. It would be expected that the auditor will already be doing their preliminary work at the time that this consultant would be engaged, and that there may be the potential for input from the auditor themselves with an initial kind of take on the structure of our accounts and systems that could inform the work of the separate consultant to deal with financial policies. And so it is possible that if it was a large enough firm and that they could demonstrate that there was adequate separation between the person giving advice on financial policy and the person doing the audit, that it could be one firm. It's more likely to be two firms. But in either case, both parties need to know the existence of the other. And so that's why they're kind of linked in the way that they are. But the work is separate.
Okay. And then before I take questions, can you talk proposed funding sources for these?
Well, we budget for the audit as it is. And then the question of how to pay for the advice on financial policy, it could, I think that we need to look at potential sources. One obvious source would be, given that it starts in the new financial year, would be potentially the line associated with studies and reports done by professionals for the town. But there could also be other sources. I would not expect that necessarily to be an extremely expensive exercise,
okay,
relative to, say, the audit. And then I'm happy to hear what Fielding's got to say about that.
Okay, really quickly, because I want to get to board member questions. Go ahead, Fielding. Thank you for being with us.
No problem. I just did want to highlight we do have $3,000 in the finance budget for professional services. So that will put a good dent in terms of this cost.
Great. Okay. Board members have questions on the RFP and the RFQ and their interrelatedness. Go ahead, Marcia.
So in a prior board meeting, we discussed this sort of idea of an auditor basically writing the financial policies. And I thought we agreed that that was the purview of the board, and we'd been actively involved in that. So I have a problem with that construction of the RFQ. If you need help implementing the financial policies, that seems a different kind of task, and I think that's appropriate. But usurping the board's prerogative to develop financial policies doesn't seem appropriate to me at all.
Okay, well, thank you for bringing this up, Marcia, because I think that's something to talk about a little bit. Right now, we have several revised policies that are in various stages. A lot of the policies don't spell out the necessary procedures and roles and responsibilities that, are separate function, so what do board members, I want to jump in with my opinion, but I should ask all of you folks, what do you think of Marcia's good point? Go ahead, Mary.
I think it is our job to come up with policy, but I think it should be informed as best we can. So some of the basis for the master financial policies was a model policy through the LCT, which turned out to be, I think, actually a master financial policy from an actual town in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
So that was sort of one basis. When we started putting it together, it was a real hodgepodge of best efforts from past boards and using what they knew. So I don't see this quite as usurping our responsibility for doing this, but rather of getting some more informed input. And we might even want to go a little beyond this. It may get into the legal realm, the statutory realm of how towns are structured and whether or not, we need a charter in order to effectively function in the way that we want to. So I see it as further information, hopefully, some expertise, hopefully a firm that has had experience working with different towns and has seen the ins and outs. So I if we just said, oh yeah, let's just let them write it for us, I'd say, yeah, I would not agree with that, but I see it as sort of expert input. Right. So I feel okay about it. And I do appreciate, I think both the RFP and the RFQ seem very well written to me. They seem very coherent and nicely written. So
great. Thanks. Thanks. Go ahead, Claudette.
So I echo what Mary said about the policies right now being a hodgepodge. They also do not address the procedural aspects because we were informed earlier that was not our mission or our authority to write the procedures related to financial policies. I personally think that having a group of 5 people or 2 people of the 5 who have no financial background is really probably not a great way to go in this day and age for writing policies. So no policy will pass unless the board approves them.
Right.
So in that way, we can, if we feel that there are things that are missing that we want to see included, that is entirely up to us. But to the donkey's work of just doing the nitty gritty, to me,
yeah.
Let's get some help here.
Okay. Thank you, Claudette. Rob, do you have any thoughts you want to weigh on?
Just that I would assume that an expert's knowledge is what's going to inform the board to make good decisions.
Right.
And certainly I'm not qualified without additional assistance to set any kind of policy that's valuable.
Right. We may have reached sort of the height of our capacities and abilities. Right. And we're now looking for some advice. I see a comment in the chat, and please feel free to make your comment after board member discussion. Go ahead, Marcia.
So just for clarification, then, whatever is developed will come back to the board for our review and approval.
Yeah.
Or change or amendment.
Yeah, it has to. Right.
Okay, good.
As you pointed out, like we're the ones. Go ahead. Do you want to add anything quickly to that, Rod?
Just to confirm that, of course, the board would be reviewing drafts. We would hope that the consultant would engage directly with the board, and then the board has the role of approving the document at the end.
Okay. Cool. Go ahead, Claudette.
I thought our chat function was supposed to be disabled, since that was.
I know you hate the chat.
I hate the chat, but it is also it's allowing a separate meeting to be occurring without everybody else being aware of it. So I just want us to be.
Oh, actually, you know what? I think the chat is turned off, so it came to me. So. Okay, so thank you very much, Claudette, for this. So a direct message came to me because the chat is turned off, and when the chat is turned off, it comes directly to the host of the meeting, and so I will read, the message that came to me. Thank you, Claudette. Shouldn't the town treasurer be, this is Pam Smith, shouldn't the town treasurer be consulted in the development of financial policies? Our treasurer has 26 years of history with the town. The history is appreciated. The treasurer is, of course, a signer on the master financial policies, right? And so, Rod, can you explain how the treasurer and other roles and responsibilities in procedures will be a part of this work or not?
Yes. So I appreciate the question from Pam, and I'm sorry to have overlooked that in my explanation. So the expectation would again be that the consultant, after reviewing the financial policies as they currently stand, would develop an understanding of the relationship between the town manager, the finance director, and the treasurer, and would engage directly with the treasurer. And we look forward to working with the treasurer as part of the team that builds the new financial policy.
That's great. All right. Thank you, Claudette, for your help with that, the Zoom help. Go ahead. You have a question, though.
Nope, I was going to make a motion.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
So I move to authorize the town manager to proceed with the issuance of an RFP for auditing services and an RFQ for financial consulting services.
A second.
Okay, made by Claudette, seconded by Mary. Can I call the question?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Rod and Fielding. All right, so next, we're moving mostly along here. Update from the Affordable Housing Committee. Members of the Affordable Housing Subcommittee will offer an update on their affordable housing strategy and present on a memo. And so I believe we'll be hearing primarily from Jeff Lubell as a representative of that group. We also have Brian Loeb with us. And then I thought I saw Jackie Allen, yes, who's chair of the Planning Commission as well. So welcome, Jeff. Welcome, everyone. So can you, thank you for your memo. I think maybe as a good place to start, can you tell us a little bit about your progress on the affordable housing strategy that is attached to the town plan, and then get more specific from there? How's that sound?
Yeah, no, that sounds fine. What we were hoping to do is to update you about the results, in particular of our review of town-owned land, to identify possible sites for below-market housing. And we also, in the memo that was delivered in February, requested authorization and funding for a technical study to identify specific development sites on land owned by the fire district to which the town has development rights. So there's a kind of a specific ask that's part of that. I want to acknowledge up front that we have not yet had a formal discussion with the fire district's prudential committee, which is obviously important. And we raised this with Rod, and he recommended that asked that we come to the select board first to have this conversation. And that to the extent that there's outreach to the prudential committee, it would be from one municipality to the other. So that is one limitation. And also just a quick note about timing. We would really hope to be able to do this technical work before the ground freezes, so that we don't lose another year. It feels like, I know we just had snow a couple weeks ago, right? But already it's summer. And so I don't know if that's going to be possible, but that would be a useful thing to do, would be to try to, if it's possible, to kind of move this forward in a way that would allow that study to take place later this year. That would be enormously helpful.
So Jeff, thanks so much. If I would really appreciate, if I may, I'm sorry, if you could speak back a little bit.
Yeah, that's what I was going to do next.
Okay,
yeah.
Great. All right.
Overview of the strategy. Can I share my screen? I was going to just show you a handful of slides, not the whole thing that we did on Monday, but just maybe 2 to 3 minutes about the strategy, 2 to 3 minutes about the review of land and what our results are, and then we can come back to the specifics. Does that work?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Sure. Let me just give me 1 second here. So, so the town housing strategy, it was developed as part of, in 2019, and it was a lot of public input. 5 listening sessions went into that, and it eventually became part of the town plan, which was adopted in March of 2020. It has these 3 objectives: to increase affordability, so that people of all incomes can find quality housing they can afford; to increase the diversity of the housing stock, to meet a range of needs, including needs of older adults and families with kids in the town workforce, and also to advance environmental sustainability. We have a few numerical goals. We have not, I think it's unlikely we're going to meet these all, but this is sort of the scale of what we're talking about over a 5-year period. There are these 5 strategies. Just big picture, one is to encourage the development of what we call dedicated affordable housing, which would be housing that rents or sells at below market levels and comes with legal restrictions that ensure that housing is and stays affordable. And this is the context in which one of those actions was to investigate the use of land owned or controlled by the town for dedicated affordable housing. There's also these other strategies, which I'm not really going to go into, but to facilitate the development of lower cost housing types. That's going to require likely some zoning changes to try to find ways to reduce barriers to new development in terms of reducing costs, and to expand public understanding of housing issues. So in terms of what we've done so far, if you remember, we adopted policies for the $45,000 revolving fund. We have completed a review of publicly owned land with Rod's help, and we'll be talking about that today. The next step in that is to explore the specific feasibility of specific sites. That's something that we hope we can move forward with soon, and we've made a specific proposal for that. There are a few things that are underway by the Planning Commission that relate to this. One is a study of development patterns, historic development patterns, and that is part of the process of updating the Norwich's zoning code, which the Planning Commission is currently in the process of. The Planning Commission is also undertaking a study of wastewater needs of the town and various options for addressing them. So these are, a lot of moving pieces, but the first thing that's really happened so far is this review of publicly owned land. So I'm going to ask Brian to just talk about the scope of this and what our findings were.
Sure. Thanks, Jeff. And apologies to Robert, who heard Jeff and I go on at length and maybe ad nauseum on Monday evening, but I appreciate his attendance at that session. We talked about one important thing that the town and only the town can do to help fulfill the strategy, and that's to bring down one of the principal barriers to developing below market rate housing in town, let alone housing with deep affordability, and that's to lower or eliminate the acquisition costs from any possible development. And that would just make so much more possible and feasible, because when you're talking about below market rate development, whether it's for rental housing or owner occupied housing, the eventual rents or mortgage that you charge the residents has to pay back what it costs to develop the project. And if acquisition is a high ticket item, it makes it really, really unfeasible.
Donkey's work of just
and so we took
doing the nitty gritty
using some preliminary criteria.
To me,
okay, so thank you very much, Planet, for this. So a direct message came to me because the chat is turned off, and when the chat is turned off, it comes directly to the host of the meeting. And so I will read, the message that came to me. Thank you, Planet. Shouldn't the town treasurer be? This is Pam Smith. Shouldn't the town treasurer be consulted in the development of financial policies? Our treasurer is 26 years of history with the town. And then
is unsuitable for environmental or other reasons, and so or it's cemeteries.
Get more specific from there. How's that sound?
We narrowed it down to
that sounds fine. What we were hoping to do is to update you about the results, in particular of our review of town-owned land,
red arrows, or red areas on the map. One is a parcel that includes the transfer station.
Doing the nitty gritty.
So using some preliminary north of that, kind of up the hill and into the woods. And we have some technical questions around this parcel that we'd like to address internally before coming back to you for a proposal to proceed with more detailed analysis. And the other section is actually two parcels of fire district owned land, kind of all out Beaver Meadow, especially on the north and east side of it as you approach Tucker Hill Road, and then just beyond Tucker Hill Road there as well. And like I said, it's owned by the fire district. The town owns the development rights. There's probably lots of this area that is unsuitable because of steep slopes or wetlands or other reasons, but it's such an expansive land that from our internal review, we imagine has at least some available land that would be suitable for a small number of dwellings. And so our recommendation to you in the memo, and as Jeff will explain, is that you authorize some conversations with the fire district to this extent, and then some more technical analysis to zero in on the right spots that we should be considering for potential development. So happy to answer any questions about this review. but I'll turn it back over to Jeff.
Great.
Yeah, thank you. So that was, the whirlwind version of obviously what's been a complicated and long process. We looked at dozens of different properties, and in the memo we identified 6 or so properties that, if other ones that were kind of the finalists, but these were the 2 that stood out as ones that, you go back, for example, to this parcel, you see that the northern portion of this is not being used. I mean, there is a communications tower, but it's otherwise basically, it's probably about 10 acres of mostly vacant land. There is a trail here. We understand from the town's recreation department that they could relocate the trail to the other side of New Boston Road. So this is a very interesting parcel, but there's a lot of, the site planning for this parcel would require a larger grant, and we are thinking about applying to the state for a grant. You would need to approve this, but looking into the possibility of there's money available for that kind of level of site planning, right? But for this parcel here, really we don't have a specific site. We have 900 acres. What we're talking about is trying to find 1 to 4 isolated locations along the road. So we wouldn't be going into the forest. We would be building along a main road, and where you could put a home or a duplex, they would be not necessarily all that close to the village center, but they would be on a regional basis quite close to job centers, and it would be an initial start, something that the town could do with land that it owns or that has development rights on, that would not cost the town ultimately anything, because the cost for the study will get reimbursed as part of the cost of once you include it as a project cost, right? So that when you sell the homes, it cover all of your planning costs as well as your the acquisition, the development costs. So that's the proposal. The homes we're proposing to sell them with, that they would be, sold. Probably these homes would probably be sold. Potentially the other site could have rental housing, but they would come with restrictions that would keep them affordable, essentially in perpetuity, so that the town would have a lasting asset. And there's a method of homeownership called shared equity homeownership, where families buy a home and they agree to sell it at an affordable price, and so they have some opportunity to essentially build wealth, but also that a lot of the they don't make a killing necessarily, and there's an opportunity to keep that home affordable to future buyers. So I know that's a lot, but the next steps, just so you understand, I mean, we need to understand very specifically where would you put the homes, right, along the road, and is there septic capacity in those homes, and how much would it cost to build them, so we can determine, if this is feasible and how much the homes would need to go for, and if it's too expensive, there are various subsidy programs that one could apply for. And one still might want to apply for them, but the first step is to figure out what are the locations. And so we believe that for $15,000 or less, we could identify as many as 4 different sites. And we, basically do the preliminary planning. And the last page of the memo, I could show you if you're interested, lays out the steps that would be done. It would be an iterative process where you start by figuring out what are the universe of sites, you narrow it down, then you go in and you do some preliminary testing to figure out kind of the situation of, and then you develop a site plan and an estimate of probable cost. So if we do fewer than 4 sites, it would be less than 15,000. That's just sort of the maximum that it would likely be.
Okay. So, all right. So obviously, I think the next, I think I hear some doggos. I don't know what it is. The doggos. All right. So I think the request is to agree to or authorize a set of conversations, right? And then figuring out that structure for these conversations. So I think that is part of the ask. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, really, we have two asks, right? So one ask is that you ask the town manager to reach out to the fire district to engage them in a conversation about the town developing small-scale below-market housing on scattered home sites on land that the fire district owns and the town has development rights. So that's one ask. And the second ask is authorize the expenditure of up to $15,000 for a technical study to identify promising sites for the development of below market rate housing on that land, and request that the town manager develop an RFP and seek professional services to execute the study. So those are the two asks. I understand one has to come before the next, but I just wanted to lay out the kind of the two pieces.
Yeah, and so I thank you. I appreciate that. So for the purpose of the discussion, that second ask is not something we're going to be asking ourselves this evening. So let's do board members have any comments and questions about that first ask?
So why are we not discussing the second one? The second one's the technical. The first one is to communicate with the fire district.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to phrase it, Mary.
Okay. Well, it does sound, like it's never been done with the fire district before, that the town would engage its right to develop. And it probably has a legal right to do it, but it's also, the fire district is another municipality, and you don't just want to say, okay, we're going to come in there and swashbuckle around and do all this stuff. And so we told you, and now we're going to do it. It's sort of nice to go and talk about it. So
yeah, let's talk about that first ask.
By the way, we agree that you don't want to move forward without having a conversation.
Right.
Great.
Completely agree with that. But yeah.
And it's as far as the development rights, I might at one point want to know what that is. I mean, is it like anything the town wanted to do?
Yeah, so thanks, Mary. Let's pause on that for a second, because that's a good question. I'm going to turn to Rod, if that's okay. Rod, what does it mean for us as a municipality to have development rights over another municipality?
Well, to answer the question a little bit more narrowly, when one entity, any entity, has development rights that are enumerated in a deed over another entity's property, you can activate development rights. I mean, I think that being said, Mary's point, of caution is really important here. So we have great working relationship with the fire district. We would want to approach them, as humbly and as respectfully as we can, and say, you've been following the process here. Jeff and I have had informal conversations with Michael Goodrich from the fire district. And so the fire district is already aware of the work of the Affordable Housing Subcommittee and me with this work. So it's not a complete shock to them. But a more formal interaction, I think, is called for if the select board wants to move forward with this. And it would be to say, look, we have these development rights. Tell us what you need to know, and tell us what your reaction to this idea is, and allow them the time to more formally respond to that. So.
Okay, great. Go ahead, Marcia. I saw your hand.
I appreciate the difficulty of this, Jeff, and I know how long you've been working on it. I think once before I asked you a question about the rule against perpetuities. I am very concerned about the ability to keep these things affordable going forward in light of something like the rule against perpetuities. And, I just don't see how that works. Maybe you have a good answer for it, but location is the problem. And so I don't know that one or two sellers down the line, we get past 21 years and we're out of luck, and it's back to high prices and unaffordable. not to mention the tax issues?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a question that has been looked at by the state and by people in Vermont, and there is a lot of precedent and a lot of thinking around the legal issues that authorize up to 99 years is the way that they structure it. It's not technically in perpetuity, but these are legal agreements that will bind the sale price of the land according to a formula for up to 99 years. And there's a group called the Champlain Housing Trust that has several hundred units under this mechanism. There are units here in Norwich that are also subject to similar restrictions on affordability when they're sold. But as we move forward, to the extent that you're interested in seeing the legal precedent, I'm happy to find them and dig up the opinion and share with you. In the short term, I can send you there's a little booklet that was done by John Davis from Burlington about this, but that was quite some time ago, but we could find more recent precedents as well.
That'd be great.
Sure.
Any other comments from board members? Go ahead, Mary.
Everyone, I know you don't want to get into the technical part, but it's just slightly on the approach of the site if it gets to the site evaluation part. If it's just a question of when that is done, there are going to be certain elements that just eliminate a parcel. For instance, septic. So in going through the process of evaluating, if you know that a very significant piece just won't work, does that knock it right out of the evaluation process, or will you have to go through all the other pieces in a package of evaluation? And we don't have to answer that. It's just something that is on my mind.
Can I just I can take 10 seconds to answer that. Just share this with you. So this is essentially these 5 tasks are ones that you would proceed in one at a time, right? You would start with some topographical maps to understand, the site layout and where the site might be, right? And then you would look at wetlands and other natural resources. You then go out and do site reconnaissance, and you have a hand auger, which gives you a preliminary sense of the soil conditions. It's not the formal thing, but and so this would help you identify some of the potential for septic on the site. So before you spend the rest of your money, you've gone out, you've done that preliminary reconnaissance, you've identified potential sites, you narrow it down, and only then do you move forward with conceptual planning around the site and opinions of probable cost.
Okay.
So you would
you could pull a plug. You could pull a plug at number 3.
You could totally pull the plug at number 3 and do no more, right? Or you could say, we're going to find 4 sites and we're only going to move forward with conceptual planning on 1 for whatever reasons, and that's going to be less expensive. So you would design the contract in a way that you would only do the work that you need. You would do no more.
Exactly. Okay, good. That was sort of answer I was hoping to hear. Thank you for. Sorry, Roger. Brief digression.
No. Thank you, Mary. Go ahead. Any other board members? Go ahead, Marcia.
So just clarification, if we're doing this, can we do it in the form of a motion to cover just the discussion, the permission for the town manager to talk to the head of the fire district?
Yeah, I think a motion will be required for this, and yes, and we should do that. Yeah, yes, I agree. Go ahead, Claudette, and then I'll take some public comments, and then we'll get to that motion.
I just want a little bit of clarification. We seem to be using Prudential Committee and Fire District interchangeably, and I believe they're two. Doesn't the Prudential Committee or manage the fire district? Is that correct? And so we would be authorizing the town manager to approach the Prudential Committee. Yeah. Not the fire district.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Thank you for that.
That's the clarity. Okay. I I see Cheryl Lindbergh. Go ahead.
There we go. Cheryl Lindbergh, 59 Koch Road, treasurer of the Norwich Fire District, treasurer of the town of Norwich. I was around and involved when the development rights were taken by the town to tax exempt the fire district land. The genesis of this development right transfer was to stop taxing the fire district on this large acreage of land, and it was $20,000 many years ago, 2001. I don't know if people have referred to the Charles Brown Brook Watershed Land Management Agreement at all in their efforts, but that document is part of the agreement that was signed back in 2001 by the Select Board and the Prudential Committee, who are the elected officials of the fire district municipality. And in that document, which you should read, it talks about the fact that the management council would do certain things which would not significantly change the character or nature or disturb the natural beauty of the land. Both the entities, the town and the district, appreciate the value of open land so close to the increasingly busy town center. Both wish to maintain the land as a place where town residents enjoy the relaxation and sense of peace and well-being experienced from being in the woods. That was the genesis of having this, and the Select Board wanted to maintain the land as open land and have recreational opportunities there for people to enjoy. It does go further, and I'll only read one other portion of it. That the Management Council shall develop and administer a plan for the recreational and educational uses of the land, as well as the necessary maintenance and management of the land, and that hiking, cross-country skiing, picnicking, and hunting, and what have you. So I hope that there's a desire on behalf of others to read these documents, because it wasn't meant to be developed. The development rights were taken over by the town to eliminate the taxation of this property and to hold it so that the fire district didn't develop the land. I can't reinforce that enough. And unfortunately, there's many individuals who worked on this back then that are no longer with us in town or have passed away. But I just want to bring this to your attention. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Cheryl. Okay, go ahead, Claudette, and then Marcia, and then we should then wrap up to a sense of. So just in response to Cheryl,
things change in 20 years, and I would think that if we were to move forward with this entire process, that we would go to the voters at a subsequent town meeting to authorize whatever change, or the proposal to develop X, Y, or Z property for affordable housing. So I don't see this as a huge barrier if we choose to move forward.
Okay. Thank you. Go ahead, Marcia.
I'm just wondering, that's an agreement, and where is it found? Is it filed someplace, with the land records? Because there's obviously a tax exemption that runs with this. So it sounds like it does have some weight and authority. And I'm just wondering where it can be found so that Jeff and others can look at that. And does the Prudential Committee, I don't even know if there's a head of the Prudential Committee or what, but the person or persons that Rod would speak to, would they have access to this and be able to talk about it?
So a couple of things really quickly. Cheryl undoubtedly has brought it to their attention, so thank you, Cheryl. And then there's 3 Prudential Committee members, and the chair is Michael Goodrich. Okay. And so that being said, I think I couldn't find this publicly anywhere, but I do believe in the past, Cheryl has sent it to me and I'm happy to distribute widely. How's that? Okay. I think you sent it to me, right, Cheryl? I think so. Yes, she's nodding. Mary, and then Jeff, you can summarize for us because we need to get to our motion.
So I would also like clarity on this agreement that I'd like to see the document that conveys the development rights to the town and the basis upon which they were conveyed, because I think that is important. If it was conveyed on the basis of conservation only, then that's very different from general conveyance of rights. And I think that needs, just in the process of talking, that could be one thing that's sorted out, and it is important.
Right.
So, I do take Claudette's comments into consideration too, that we have this urgent need for housing, and perhaps there's also a way to do this so we're not destroying the woods. To do it nicely. So.
Okay. Yes. And so the only thing I will say to it too is, I would struggle with how to begin to summarize, beyond saying that, this public body supports the work of a public body, right? So the select board supports and endorses the work of the Affordable Housing Subcommittee and would like to engage in a conversation about exercising development rights. Sort of beyond that sort of statement that opens the meeting, I would have no ability to sort of facilitate the conversation further. Quite frankly, I don't even know how we would structure that conversation.
Are you talking about a motion or what?
I'm making a comment.
Okay.
So, which is to say that, like, obviously our motion, directs the town manager to begin to have that conversation with the chair, and it will be informed by the work of the committee, and like that is what we have confidence in. Yes, Jeff Lubell, I see your hand. Go ahead. Would you like to go?
Yeah, no, thank you. I don't want to tell obviously the select board how to conduct its business. I would just say that it seems to me that the conversation is really about the possibility of putting some small scale housing on the fire district land. I don't know if it needs to be structured as the town exercising its development rights. The fire district may well welcome this and say it's a great idea. We want to do it too. There's a way to do this. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a legal thing. Ultimately, it may very well be a consensual thing. But the first thing to do is just to open up the conversation. And I'm quite confident that there is a way to do. It's 900 acres, right? If you build a couple of duplexes along the road, you're not going to interfere with the recreational use of that land. And I think it would be important to find a way to preserve the beauty of the land. And we firmly believe there's a way to have preservation and open space and also a place for people to live. And it's very important to find ways to balance that. And I trust that the select board and the prudential committee could find a way to do that.
Sure. And I just to be clear, I was repeating your language that I had heard. But it's fine. That makes sense too. Thank you, Jeff. Cheryl, you have a comment, right?
Yes, Cheryl Lindbergh. This time, I just would like to ask the question, and I'll leave it with you, that we do have affordable housing in one part of our town on Star Lake Village area. And I have wondered about the managing of the affordability of those that live there ongoing. And I don't know if this is touching on what Marcia was talking about with perpetuity or not, but I do know there's a process for being there in one of the locations at Star Lake, and that it's managed, I believe, by the Upper Valley Land Trust or something. No, it's some other organization. I can't remember. But there's a way to be eligible to be in the housing. But I don't know that there's an ongoing monitoring of eligibility. And I wonder if that's being considered in all of the work that's being done right now.
Okay, so just for the record, it's managed by Twin Pines. Thank you, Cheryl, for your comment. I'll take Brian Loeb. You have your hand up. Go ahead, and then I'm going to ask board members to help me out with the motion.
Thanks, Roger. Yeah, Cheryl. Twin Pines is the analog in our region for Champlain Housing Trust, with which Jeff mentioned. It's not a novel mechanism, the idea of a community land trust. Vermont is one of its early homes, but it's spread and diversified nationally and has quite a bit of richness and variety. And Jeff, we're blessed to have him. He has as much knowledge as anyone on this issue. What I would say is that this idea of investigating town-owned land or land that the town has a development interest in is one of the very few things in the housing strategy adopted by the Select Board that requires the town to act, and that can only be done by the town. And so furthering this investigation, and that's really what we're talking about. We don't have developers lined up. We don't have sites lined up. We're really still in the learning phase. But to continue that learning phase, we need you to act to make this, to make it possible, to make it more than just a promise on paper that this is a goal of the town. So that's why we're coming to you with this specific request.
Okay. Go ahead, Claudette. You're helping us get to a motion.
Yeah, I'm willing to. I'll read what I have. I'm sure it can be tweaked. So I move to authorize the town manager to approach the Prudential Committee to investigate the feasibility for small-scale affordable housing on fire district land.
That's good to me.
That's good. Is there a second?
Did Marcia have a?
Well, there'll be a discussion. There's a discussion phase of the motion. Can I get a second?
Second.
Okay, made by Claudette, seconded by Rob. All right, any discussion to this motion? Go ahead, Marcia.
Friendly amendment?
Go ahead.
Friendly amendment. I would say I had something similar drafted, but I was going to specify span number 450, 142, 11, 59, 2 and 450, 142, 12, 882.
I'm happy to accept that amendment.
Sure.
Is Rob happy with it too?
Sure.
Unless they own other spans, right? No. Okay, great.
They do own other spans, actually.
Yep.
But were those two spans that Marcia listed the ones that you are looking at specifically?
Yes, they are. Sorry, I was being facetious. Sorry, I should not have done that. All right, are we ready with the friendly amendment?
Mm-hmm.
Just quick clarification, because I'm always concerned about everything being right. So Rod gets this authorization. He goes off and talks to people. Then he comes back to us, tells us the result of that.
Yes.
Then we consider the next step.
Yes. And so Rod, can talk to us about your workload and your time frame for this, because I've certainly felt pressured in this conversation. So how do you feel about the timing and schedule?
Well, clearly the schedule being proposed is tough, and we don't have any indication of the disposition of the Prudential Committee either. So I understand that from a message left by Michael Goodrich today, that there's a strategic planning event proposed by the Prudential Committee coming up in the next couple of weeks, and I've been invited to that. So I'm guessing that might be my opportunity. So I look forward to attending that and discussing that. Subsequent to that, I'm not sure that I can give any kind of commitments about the schedule, but let's take that as a first step.
Okay, great. This is great. This is real movement after a very long history, right? So this is great. Okay, so I think we have a motion on the table, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, can I call the question?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. All in favor, please raise your hand. All right, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff, Brian, and Jackie.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Let's take a break. I certainly need one. How's that? So it's 8:20. Let's come back at 8:30.
What?
All right. Thanks.
The recording has stopped.
Okay, waiting for the people to come back. All right.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, resuming the May 11th Select Board meeting at 8:30. All right, so for let's say the next half hour, let's sort of talk about some calendaring, some implicit priority setting. Let's try to get it so that way we can sort of know what it is that we want to do for the rest of the year. And we should talk as broadly as we need to until 9 is what I would say. So what I could do is I could share my screen and we can look at some lists of some things. I could do that. I could also take the approach of beginning with hearing from each of you about what you think absolutely needs to be done and how do we want to. I'm going to ask the group, how do you want to proceed? Because this could be a very far-ranging conversation, and I'm tempted to just let it be. Go ahead, Claudette. Maybe go ahead.
So just a comment. When the agenda just says review the Gantt chart. So I believe I don't know if I copied the entire board, but I believe I asked you, Roger, specifically, is this a meeting where we're going to review our goals and try to prioritize them?
Yeah.
And your response was no.
Was it? I think I think my response might have been it could be. So let me share my screen. How's that sound? So do y'all see my screen? I don't see you anymore, which is fine. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So if you remember, Rod sort of created in Excel a couple of categories, a couple of organizational strategies for planning a year, right? And so he had talked about that there's administrative work, that there are these financials, there's this budget, capital planning, governance, grants and projects, departments, committees, intergovernmental relations, and community, right? And he talked about it as things that you do as part of being a board, things that you have to do, and things that you want to do. I'm poorly paraphrasing Rod's work. And so, we can sort of look at any of this. We can look at, something like approved warrant for town meeting is a major milestone, like that's tracked in here. And then we can look at, we can open up any one of these things and have a breakdown of things that are more specific. So if we decided that what we wanted to do for ARPA is space planning for Tracy Hall or some kind of space planning for assessment, you can open it up a little bit and you can see that, what that work really means is that there's an RFQ process that needs to happen, that we need to approve it, that there's a bid period, and that we approve a contract. That, of course, assumes that we're interested in space planning for Tracy Hall as a part of ARPA. And that relates a little bit to something like, sorry, I'm scrolling really quickly, Tracy Hall capital needs. We know that Tracy Hall capital needs discussions will be informed potentially by what I just talked about, the space planning needs that would be an ARPA project. And so if I go over to another tab, you'll see in the chart that these are then linked, right? Like you can't really talk about Tracy Hall capital needs until you talk about Tracy Hall space planning, and you can't talk about Tracy Hall space planning until you decide that you want to do it as an ARPA project. And so that's a little bit of what I was mapping. And so we can continue to sort of talk about sort of the weeds as I just talked about it, or we could start at a much higher level, right? And I think last year what we did, I like to think, and maybe there's some room for disagreement, and then I'll step back from talking, is we did everything that we said we were going to do in some ways. And we had these 4 core goals that we wanted to do. We wanted to look at Article 36. We wanted to look at our childcare committee and all the work that goes into supporting it and getting and hearing these reports. We also wanted to engage a public safety discussion where we went through an RFP process, right? That of course then, we didn't get voter approval for. And we wanted to keep the lights on, which accumulated in, major article requests around, our informed by our master financial policy review and that establishment of the designated fund around operational performance. So what I will say to all of that is that came from a higher level discussion, but I'm happy to bring out my screen and get into the weeds for the nitty gritty too. So I guess I'm asking board members on a process level, how do you want to talk about how to talk about it? Does that make sense? Who's lost? Go ahead, Mary.
I just sort of talking from my gut.
Please.
In a smaller sense, I do want to pick up the child care committee work again. I'm still sort of terrified of ARPA, making sure that we, use the funds widely. I'm most interested in Tracy Hall and or one of the website and digitization that ties into communication. So that's what I'm most interested in for this year.
Yeah, and I appreciate that high level, right? Because it begins a place to begin. So you want to sort of look at the child care committee and the work that could come out of that. You want to make sure we look at Tracy Hall. Sorry, I'm summarizing. Tracy Hall and how that relates to ARPA. And you want to think about website redesign. Website
digitization, maybe communication in general.
Okay.
With each other, with the town,
okay.
Just in all different directions.
Right. Okay, cool. And then in some of this will, if we prioritize this, Rod will in turn prioritize this, right? Because the website and Tracy Hall have, they're
tied together anyway.
They're tied.
All of it's tied, but except childcare is a little bit farther down. But anyway.
Okay, and then. Okay, so that's helpful. Does anyone want to sort of proceed in the way that Mary just did? Claudette, you had a lot of questions about ARPA separate. You want to you want some clarity on ARPA too, and you were hoping that would be achieved in this agenda item. So go ahead, Marcia, you had your hand up.
I'm just going back to, from the high level view, my board priorities from March, which were, I think, number 1 has to be personnel. So we never got around to town manager accountability, goals, priorities, and metrics. And interwoven with that is personnel issues and policies. I think the personnel policy has to be really updated. And then I think in terms of working cohesively so that we're not spinning wheels and having everybody in town on the same page, I'd like to really look at the cohesiveness of all of the appointed, elected employees, everybody, to see, that the websites are right so that we're directing people to the town website. We're not like cats all over the place with various separate entities out there. And I wanted to do something sooner rather than later about the animal ordinance. I threw out something, I don't know, months ago. I'd like to look at that. And then I think that sort of global look at public safety that we talked about.
Excuse me.
Okay. And so I'm taking notes. There's one thing that overlaps with what Mary just said, which is like sort of a website organization communication. So there's one thing that is emerging as a priority. Go ahead, Claudette.
going that route and not having pulled up my memo that I sent to the board, I want to move forward on the Article 36 task force recommendations.
Okay.
The Child Care Committee recommendations.
Okay.
For sure, website redesign. Tracy Hall redesign.
Yeah.
Including HVAC.
Yep.
The animal ordinance, but this is all getting to how much can we do. Public safety for sure. I think the financial policies issue will be addressed by the RFQ.
Yeah.
And the personnel policy issues hopefully will be addressed by our HR consultant. And then just reviewing, we need to get the report from Mark.
Yes, and thanks. And he has begun interviewing folks. So,
you know, and looks in terms of what do I think we can, how much can be accomplished is the big question. So I would want to, after we get everybody's input, somehow throw that up on the screen, see where we agree, and possibly hone that list down to what we consider to be essential.
Okay, so some of this is, you know, sort of already charted a little bit. You know, I have some of these have start dates in sort of July and have us carrying through before November. So, but I do think what I will say is that a lot of this is really informed by the town manager and their capacity, right? So if we want to do a website redesign, that I imagine is an RFQ process, and any RFQ process will require a major public engagement process. I don't know of any website that doesn't involve like asking and polling the community. And I think a lot of people are savvy and have a lot of opinions about what kind it's not just like, you know, is the town, all of the town, as Marsha was alluding to, represented on this website, which will be a difficulty in and of itself, migrating all of the content that has been created elsewhere that represents the town. It also raises questions around, you know, what kind of electronic automation, you know, do you get your dog permit online, right? Those kinds of questions. So that would be huge, and we would probably be playing a leading role in that public engagement process too, right? So I think like right there is a lot. And it's also expensive.
We hear from Rob also.
Yep. So I'm just go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, the Article 36 is, of course, something that I'm concerned with. We've had several years, haven't done a damn thing to actually make movement towards accomplishing what we were directed to do. And I agree that the website is really important, but at some level you could start, I would think, fairly quickly, thinking of it as a method of communicating what's going on, and then add on to it with the more complex levels of how do you go online to buy dump stickers and cat licenses and dog licenses and so on. But that getting that overall start of making government transparent would be a fairly simple thing. But we need to start on that. We need to do Article 36. The Tracy Hall is part of that, potentially a part of the making some movement on Article 36. Whether or not it has to be considered the primary focus of that or not, I don't know. But if we get to it, we have to make sure we get to those things with enough speed that we can get the public input and that we can make sure we have the funds allocated and budgeted.
Great. Okay, thank you. Marsha, I see your hand.
I was just going to suggest that we've got enormous talent sitting on our doorstep. The students at Dolly Lab, they can do this website stuff. And I'm just thinking, might be worth exploring.
Right. Okay. So a couple things. So a thing that I'm like maybe feeling, and I would like to know what y'all think too, is, and maybe it's just, me and my unique position in this group, is there's immense pressure to engage with a committee or an individual or an interest. There's a lot of requests, I think, on our time. And I think in some ways we have to be more prepared to interact and hear from people, but not from a place that is reactionary, a place that is a built-in process. And so I think a lot of us have talked about, sort of developing stronger relationships with our committees, either because we are concerned about an action that they have taken or because we don't, we want to engage more meaningfully, right? We want to know more about their work, right? I think Claudette in the past has suggested liaisons, and, I know, she led by example and sort of doing a lot of engagement with the Solid Waste Committee, for example. However, and I know that Mary and Rob have been great on our ad hoc committees and playing supporting roles, and that has led to meaningful reports in some ways, or our engagement. All that being said, we can in our meetings, so I'm hearing some notes that we want to look at Tracy Hall. We want to do a little bit of the website. And that is sort of the only thing that was consistent. I think if we take that on and then we start a process where we convene our committees from, during June and July with a set of sort of stakeholder questions, I think that might be a deliberate exercise. So just a quick example, and then I'll step back. So if you schedule time with the Conservation Commission to come, we might actually have a dialogue that says, so Emerald Ash Borer, right? We gave $10,000. It's $800 to an injected tree. We could have a conversation about Emerald Ash Borer. We can talk a little bit more about how they manage invasive species, which is a new threat of climate change, right? And talk about what kind of support is needed. And you can sort of go through. You can imagine a similar sort of discussion, with each committee, through the months. Go ahead, Claudette.
I would say I agree with that proposal, but before we go there, I want us to really look at the Article 36 Task Force recommendations, because some of those, if we adopt some of those, it may feed into what some of our committees are doing. And I think we cannot, there were some really pretty basic recommendations by the Child Care Committee that I think we also need to adopt. Not that they're going to, or they may possibly impact what some committees are doing, who knows? But we spent a lot of, or our citizenry spent a lot of time, effort, and energy coming up with those reports that I do not think we can, at this point in time, disregard and not move forward.
Right. And I would encourage people to watch the school board meeting where the Child Care Committee report was discussed. They talked about the regulatory framework in ways that our presentations didn't. But maybe in looking at the Article 36 recommendations and coming up, and in these conversations, we'll have a model for, convening the other committees in terms of like a dialogue about, the work. Okay.
One comment. I think this is worthwhile to think about. If we have a concern about the way that committees communicate, would that also be something maybe we would just, as a matter of course, sort of go over that or explore that with each committee so that we can start building the consistency that Marcia was talking about?
Right. So for under committees, one thing that I did was 2 milestones, one of which was for today, was to develop a list of stakeholder style questions for all committees. So what are some questions that we would want to ask of all committees, right? Which is, whatever they may be. They might be, do you have a chair? Do you take motions? Do you have training in Robert's rules? Like you might have like a set of stakeholder questions that you might just be interested in. And then at the end, you might want to review observations and themes from committees in sort of a deliberate process. Whatever gets kicked up from that. And then in here, you can just and then you begin the process of maybe convening and sort of hearing from people. So I think somewhere in here I had, so for Conservation Commission, like you might want to talk about the Emerald Dashboard Designated Fund and their further work on the Emerald Dashboard. And you might want to then discuss long-term plans for, I've already said this. The only thing I would say right now is committees, are very talented and have a lot of autonomy and they set their own agendas. And so, I think there's a delicate balance by saying we're not looking to set your agendas, but we want to inform and we want your work to inform us. Go ahead, Claudette.
One way that we can get to a lot of what you're asking or saying,
is
just to appoint board liaisons to these groups, so that the board liaison can tell the chair, hey, you forgot to post your minutes, or you need to include this in your packet, or this is what the town is looking at. I just think we can streamline what you're saying by just appointing liaisons to these boards.
Yeah, and that's a question for the group. I can't go to any more meetings, respectfully. I'm stacked. Go ahead, Marcia.
I was just thinking that if we had sort of a template of questions and an instructional sort of basic structure that everybody should be following, like open meeting law, that kind of stuff, what it means to have a group, etc. And then we put that on that Gantt chart or whatever. Maybe then we don't have to do a lot of meetings with people, but we have that rubric that we all agree to, that when we then go out to liaise, we can say, this is what we expect, and you can find it here on the Gantt chart, right?
So why do folks want to liaise rather than convene?
I'm not necessarily anxious to have more meetings, but if it's necessary to sort of make that connection or go for specific things, I think that's important.
Okay. Go ahead, Claudette.
I'm happy to convene, but I think before we can convene, I had submitted, might have been even almost a year ago, July of last year, I want to say, an outline of what would be presented to board chairs for the processes they needed to follow. But I think we need to provide them with that information, and then we can convene. But to convene without providing them with that information, I guess.
Yeah. And I would just say it is a humbling thing to engage in a discussion and learn more about their operations before, sort of making an order and then convening. You know what I mean? It's just like a different.
Well,
I hear you. I hear you. Okay.
Whatever.
Yeah, I hear you. Okay, Marcia.
Claudette, I don't remember receiving that, but I remember talking about it. Could you send it to me again?
It was, I will find it. I believe it was just a very rough outline that we were supposed to have taken up again, but we never did. But I'll find it and send it to the rest, to
Thank
everybody.
you.
Go ahead, Mary.
I think I like both the idea of liaison and convening. They're two very different things. But I think just with the child care committee, since it was new, there weren't any habits that had been built up. So, I could go in as liaison and just say, well, let's be careful about the open meeting law. It sort of shaped the way that we did things, or this is a select board meeting, and that we did have a charge that did have a sunset that made a big difference in how that committee kind of played out. But if you have a committee that's been going on for years and it's got subcommittees and sort of habits, then I think it's a little hard to shape it, I think, whether you're liaison or not. So.
Right.
And I was just suggesting with communication, well, let's say that just as part of, let's say we're trying to gather public input for redesigning the website.
Right.
Just informally, would each committee have a small wish list for what would help? That's all. Like keep it kind of short.
Okay. All right. Okay. This was, I think, helpful. I want to turn a little bit to, so we all kind of mentioned Tracy Hall. There's some more immediate capital needs that need to be addressed in Tracy Hall that could come up through a budget process, right? But we also know that there's an ARPA question on how it relates to ARPA is possibly relevant to that. So Rod, can you tell us how you're thinking about Tracy Hall and like how this board can advance Tracy Hall and how it may or may not relate to ARPA?
Thank you, Roger. Yes, I've been thinking about this quite a bit. So I think that the first cut is to retain somebody that can do a space analysis.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's important for the HVAC question, and which is the key ingredient that needs to be solved for Tracy Hall. So it's a really complex puzzle, and it's a very complex building to deal with in terms of wanting to make any changes. So the first thing to do is try and figure out, in light of hiring more people and the existing limitations of the building, how best to arrange the space. That will give us a better read on what is imaginable and practical from a energy efficiency standpoint. And that will dictate the boiler choice. And the boiler choice is urgent. I lost count of the number of times the service techs came to Tracy Hall over winter to keep the boilers going. It was upwards of 8 times. It's very clear they're not going to last. So there's a sort of a degree of urgency here that is really pressing down on us. We should be much further along in the decision-making process if we think that we're going to have alternative boilers for the coming heating season. The added complexity of that with Article 36 work and other people's work on alternative approaches to the heating problem and the realities of the market are another confounding aspect there. That is to also underscore that for me to take time to work on that means that I can't do other things. Unless we take the more radical step of hiring somebody to manage that project. I have had negotiation or discussions with Jeff Martin from Two Rivers. There is a former employee of Efficiency Vermont who can for a small amount of money analyze alternative heating systems for Tracy Hall and make recommendations. But I think that to some extent needs to at least coincide with a space analysis. I think for me, and with the ARPA money, that's probably the top pick. And the ARPA money may not be enough to solve that problem alone. So I think that's the other complexity. So I need more information about how much a new heating ventilation system would cost. I think it's apparent that we've got ventilation problems and cooling problems in the summer, as well as heating problems in the winter. And so the way the space problem also gets introduced to that is we have this huge cavern in the middle of the building, the gym, which is undersized for a basketball court. And it's not separately zoned with a thermostat effectively. So any solution that we come up with in terms of space utilization has to, and HVAC has to encounter the problem of the gym space and how to isolate that or better deal with that as a technical problem. So in short, I think that's work that hasn't been done. That's the toughest nut to crack, and it's the biggest one, but we need to start now.
Okay, so Rod, because in that little Gantt chart that I was showing, I had said that we need to begin. I had thought, and hearing a little bit that folks were interested in Tracy Hall, I had said that we would begin some kind of process in June, and all the approvals that would be required of us, and the discussions that would be required of us. We would start in June and we would end in September. Is that a realistic schedule? Because we would need all of this prep work in advance of the budget season. Is that right?
Yes. I believe that we can get a space analysis and a alternative analysis for the HVAC in place by September. Sure.
And so what is, just to continue this line of thought, and I'm sorry, what is an alternative heating system analysis, considering that we have a lot of work done already around that with a volunteer committee?
Right. And so what it would do is, what I'm asking for is a price per BTU, which is the bridge thermal unit, which allows us to compare conventional HVAC systems with renewable energy alternatives, and then cost out specific responses. So basically look at how much would it cost us to do this with propane and mini splits for summer heat. For summer, how much would it cost us to go to some kind of wood pellet or basically wood fiber fueled heating system that would replace the boilers? Theoretically, maybe also electric boilers. Then the idea would be, if we were going to go for electric boilers, how much solar panel energy produced would we need to offset the electricity bill, and how viable is that as a solution?
Okay.
So there are the things that we would model. Okay. And it would pick up on the work. This person would receive the work from the Energy Committee and the Article 36 group.
Okay. Is there any? And then finally, one last question, because I think we all need to hear this. What other? So we're going into a budget season. Like a lot of our work should be about getting ready for a budget process, right? So what other, like RFQ? What kind of prep do you need for this budget year, considering that, as we talked about in our last meeting, the ARPA projects are sort of a part of the next year's operating budget, right? So what prep work is needed of us as the board for that budget, I guess might be my question. So we're talking about you just talked about this alternative spatial analysis and a space analysis for Tracy Hall's capital needs, but what else is like that, would you say? Well, do you understand my question? I'm struggling.
I think I do. I think I think that the keys here that I've been imagining are that we would contract with an architect or a similar professional to do a space analysis of Tracy Hall. That we would contract with this person that we found through Jeff Martin to present us with tangible information about selecting the most appropriate replacement HVAC system that would address the air quality considerations as well as moving to renewable energy and what that would cost and what that would look like. Those would both produce vital pieces of information that would shape the budget. It's conceivable that we would end up having a order of magnitude kind of estimate for some space rearrangement in Tracy Hall as part of that to better meet both the energy efficiency goals and the space organization in the first place. So that should be in place before the budget discussions commence. There's a similar need to do an engineering study for the DPW building given its condition. It's different. It's not a space utilization question. It's a condition report on the basis of obvious failings, the roof leaking, other structural issues that we're encountering. It's similar to that where there's a question about underground storage tanks and their future and our liability. So that information would also be in place by September. And then that would give us enough information, I believe, more than enough information in terms of the budget to work through the budget issues, both from a capital planning point of view over the next 5 years and also the FY24 budget. That would allow us then to isolate how we were going to use the ARPA funds and which projects we were going to use some of the ARPA funds to offset the cost of. And so that would allow us to formulate the FY24 budget and make kind of an outline, if you like, of what we could spend ARPA money on for the FY25 budget. So given that we've got just over $1 million, you could either think of it in sort of, basically we should be thinking of it in two chunks of $500,000. Because if we start something in FY24, towards the end of FY24, we need to finish spending it by FY20, I think April 2026. Right?
Okay. Was that help? So was that helpful?
Is that helping you? Is that helping you piece out the schedule in terms of a Gantt chart?
Well, I think it regrounded us a little bit. I don't know what other people think.
Good.
Mary, I saw your hand, and then Marcia.
Yeah, just in terms of space analysis, just asking that perhaps we could think about being a little flexible about it, in that if a person comes in and really figures out adequate space, it might become apparent just from the way people have just been jammed into Tracy Hall over the years that the space in there is not adequate for what people have to do. So we could perhaps, have a flexible attitude if that is the outcome. And then there might be a radical, there could be a refocusing of purpose for Tracy Hall, and there could be a radical reorganization of space. Right. So, there could be various questions that come out of that. And I think we just have to be prepared for that. But I agree with Rod. I think a space analysis is like very high priority for Tracy Hall.
Well, just really quick, Rod, sorry. Will it assume current uses? No,
not necessarily. So I think that's one of the challenges. So obviously everyone feels familiar with it the way it is now, but just in this past 6 months, we've decided to add 2 staff positions to Tracy Hall, and there's not necessarily an obvious solution to where they're going to actually sit and then have access to a phone or anything such as that. Some spaces are very generous, some spaces are very compact. We have poor management of filing and paper materials and archiving. So, we don't have appropriate storage systems for those things to compact them. If we move aggressively on digitization. We can then archive more aggressively and have better management of space for offices and then archiving separately. I think that Mary's pointing to something really important, which is it's a sort of a typical municipal building in the sense that people have made compromises over the years to fit things in where they fit, and then things become established. So it was Pamela Smith that told me something really astounding the other day, which was first the multi-purpose room was 40 years ago. It was the cafeteria for the school, and that obviously where the listers are now used to be the select board. I'm sure they were called select men in those days. That was a select board room, and they used the blackboard to make notes on. And that's charming in its own way. So there's a history of every office that's in the building now has been in a different location. Mm-hmm. And Mary's probably got a better grasp of that than just about anybody else. So there's no necessary reason that the layout has to be the way that it is. And it takes somebody with an outside perspective and a professional background to sort of look at it and go, you know what, this is all backwards. You need to do something completely different. And there's people around that I would be happy to work with that I know who's got the skills to do that kind of thing. Mary's also right. It could be if you keep on going in this direction as a town, then you may need a different space.
Space somewhere.
This may not stretch to give you appropriate office space for the 21st century and the other spaces that, as a town, you seem to require, like room for recreation programs and so forth. And so that's a more conceptual discussion, and would present the select board with some really interesting but challenging capital planning questions, right? And other towns encounter this. Libraries encounter this. Do we try and fix what we've got? Do we get a new building? How do we go about that? What are our choices? There's an added layer of complexity. Tracy Hall is a contributing structure to the historic district. You cannot change the external shape or appearance or materials of the building very easily, nor can you with any other building in the village that you can imagine, except I think for the apartment block that's next to Dan and Witt's. So down to the level of the garage in the back of the house next door, that's the realtor's office, that's a contributing structure. You couldn't knock it down. You couldn't change its appearance. You could change its internal use, but you can't change its external appearance. So there are some really interesting constraints that need to be encountered. And I'm sure I've overwhelmed you already with that, but yeah.
Oh, that makes sense.
Okay, so from this discussion, I'm hearing, and then I want to hear what other people are hearing, and then let's call it, is a real focus, because we like a theme, right? A real focus on our physical and digital spaces, right? And everything that comes with that. And then our committees, right? Our Article 36 recommendations, our child care committee recommendations, and, convening or liaisoning with everyone else, right? Mm-hmm. And then I think we should start from there and then go out to other things that I had heard, right? Like animal ordinances, personnel policies, and go from there. What does everyone else hear? Go ahead, Claudette.
I agree with that approach. The danger is to pile on so much stuff that we get nothing done. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm happy with that approach. And if we find ourselves, or if we, if board members agree that, okay, Marcia's really interested in the animal ordinance, so, go ahead and in addition to send us something. But, I think the priority should be what you have just said. And if we can add stuff above and beyond, that's great. But let's keep it a little tight.
Keep it simple.
I can map that a lot much more easier than what I got going now. So that's helpful. Go ahead, Marcia.
Yeah, and I'm still very interested in the personnel stuff, which I hear you all saying is going to solve out to some extent when we.
Yeah, won't.
No.
Well, I'm agreeing with you. I'm agreeing with you. Sorry, go ahead, Marcia. Sorry.
To get to it somehow and sooner rather than later. I'm just wondering, I did draft something for the animal ordinance, and it's pretty strict, and I'm thinking to get forward on some of these things, would it be possible to, under open meeting law, convene sort of like a small group of us with maybe the chief of police and kind of hammer out something to bring back to the board so that we're not usurping a lot of board time, but we could maybe get ahead on some things?
I think I could, why don't I put in some dates on an animal ordinance on the Gantt chart, and we'll see, maybe we'll go from there, because I think Rod also has a sense of like staff time and staff capacities too. And because it also involves the clerk. So yes, I can Gantt chart it out if that's helpful. Yeah, go ahead, Rod. And then.
Yes, I agree with Marsha on the urgency of dealing with the animal ordinance. I think it's not going to go away until we make some kind of meaningful effort there. I would say that it would involve the clerk, the police department, and the recreation department at the very least, from a staffing and other elected official standpoint. So I can give an undertaking to coordinate the response and input from the department, my office, and the police department. So it may be the easiest thing to do is to respond to a draft, and we can look at other towns and other communities and see how they've resolved these pretty charged issues.
I can send you again what I drafted.
So let's.
Yeah, I think I have it. Let's
return next time to what we just talked about and see where we're at, because I think if we break down each one of these things, if we do, we'll find that we've hit the budget. We've hit our 9 meetings, and then if we want to do anything else, we have to make decisions about meetings or workload, right?
Yep, makes sense.
Okay, and then obviously Article 30. So this is good because Article 36 and Tracy Hall things are gonna intersect too.
They
right?
will intersect.
All right. Anybody have any closing comments, thoughts on sort of this calendaring discussion?
Nope, I think it's good.
Share the link with the Gantt chart as a. Even as just a read only, I'm not used. That's a program I'll have to play around with.
Yeah, me too. Really, I think the burden. I think what it was is that it was just too much to chart. Like you don't chart out this much, right? Like you do much more discrete projects, and so like this conversation will make it a more effective tool.
And as a visual learner, I just need to see the visuals.
Okay, cool. All right. Anyone else? Any thoughts? How are we feeling? Feeling enough?
Good.
All right. Should we move on to our next item on the agenda?
Is it adjourning?
Yeah.
It is.
All right. I move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, made by Mary, seconded by Marcia. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, good night, but thanks.
Good night.
Good night, everybody. Thanks so much.
Good night.
Yeah.
The recording has stopped.